Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning to talk about restoring the Central Asheville Watershed. I'll start by acknowledging our project partners. Clean Water Management Trust Fund and the Pigeon River Fund both contributed to this project. They funded the project, and we'd like to thank them for their support. Also, the City of Asheville partnered with RiverLink, and North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, the Division of Water Resources, made a significant contribution to this project through staff time, as well as lending us their water quality testing lab. And Blue Earth Engineering helped RiverLink lead this important study. A little bit about RiverLink. We are an Asheville-based environmental nonprofit, and our mission is to promote the environmental and economic vitality of the French Broad River Watershed. We are an accredited land trust, so we protect land that is important to protecting water quality. We also do on-the-ground restoration projects, and we have a robust environmental education program as well. So I'd like to start by reviewing an agenda for today so that you know what to expect. I'll start out by giving some background on the project and the watershed. Then we'll talk about water quality, or basically how clean are the streams in the Central Asheville watershed. Then we'll go over the restoration goals. Then we'll talk about what do we do now. Talk about proposed projects and policies to improve water quality in the Central Asheville watershed. Then I'll give a brief tour of the StoryMap. The restoration plan will exist as an interactive story map on RiverLink's website. So we'll talk about that because maps are cool. And then we'll talk about next steps. And finally, we want to hear from you. So we'll have a discussion about the project. You can add your questions to the chat box, and we'll go through each one individually and do our best to answer them. All right, so first I'll start out talking about the watershed. The Central Asheville watershed on this map is the red area in the center of Asheville. So it's a very appropriate name for this watershed. It really is at the heart of the city of Asheville. If you've been following along with this project over the past year, you've no doubt noticed that we changed the name of the watershed. Originally, it was referred to as the River Arts District Watershed Project, but through communicating with watershed residents and stakeholders, we come to realize that to be more inclusive of all the watershed communities, we needed to change the name. And so we chose the Central Asheville Watershed as the new name. It really does better describe geographically the area that we are working in, and it doesn't exclude or favor any one particular neighborhood or community in the watershed. This map is a close-up showing the watershed. It's outlined in brown. There are three main streams in the watershed: Bacoate branch, Town or Nasty branch is the largest of the three, and then the newly named Haith branch. So the watershed extends from the slopes of Bowcatcher Mountain and includes almost all of downtown Asheville, South Slope, neighborhoods like the Southside community, South French Broad, drains into the River Arts District, includes a significant portion of AV Tech's campus, and this entire area drains into the French Broad River as it flows through the River Arts District. This section of the French Broad River is one of the most popular for recreation, and it also regularly fails to meet water quality standards due to high levels of bacteria. We know that there are water quality issues in this section of the French Broad River, as well as in Town or Nasty branch. So we'll talk in more detail about these water quality issues further into the presentation, but These are some of the reasons why RiverLink decided to focus our work on this particular watershed. So what are our goals for this project? We established our goals early on, and the overarching goal is to address water quality issues in the central Asheville watershed. To do that, the goal is to create what the EPA refers to as a 9-element restoration plan. Critical goal is to gather community input on the plan, raise awareness about water quality issues in this particular watershed. Also important, consider the impacts that this restoration plan may have on the community in the watershed. Also, we set out to explore green job training opportunities. Help connect communities to the watershed because it's easier to care for something that you have a connection to. And build a coalition to help implement the plan because RiverLink cannot tackle these issues alone. We'll need a broad and diverse coalition of stakeholders to help us move this plan forward. So how do we go about reaching these project goals? Well, the Central Asheville Watershed Study began in August of 2019, and this has been a year-long study where RiverLink, our project team, we explored the watershed, looking for water quality issues and opportunities for restoration and to address the issues that we found. So we collected water samples in the 3 streams. We also conducted extensive community outreach. RiverLink volunteers contributed 300 hours of service in the Central Asheville watershed. The image on the left is of RiverLink volunteers removing non-native invasive plant species from the stream banks of Town or Nasty Branch. We also held a really successful Name That Creek campaign. Prior to this project, Haith Branch, which flows through a wooded area of AB Tech's campus, was unnamed. So we worked with community members to propose names for the stream, and then the community voted to name it Haith Branch. This name is to honor Mr. Lacey T. Haith. He was a prominent African-American community member. He was a very well-loved teacher at the segregated Stevens-Lee High School. He later taught at Asheville High. And he was a master builder. Mr. Haith and his students at Stevens-Lee High School built several homes in this watershed along a street named Haith Branch, which was also named in his honor. And it just so happens that these 3 homes, one of them being Mr. Haith's home, rests at the top of Haith Branch. So it's very appropriate that this stream was named in his honor. You can read more about our Name That Creek campaign on the interactive story map that I mentioned earlier and learn more about Mr. Lacey T. Haith's significant contributions to the Asheville community. We also attended block parties, neighborhood events. The image on the right is a table that we had set up at the Grant Center Fall Festival last October. At these events, we raised awareness about the project and also gathered community input. And then we created a story map, which is the interactive restoration plan for the watershed. And I'm going to talk in more detail about this later on in the presentation. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marshall Taylor with Blue Earth Engineering so that he can talk about some of our project results.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Renee. I'm going to quickly summarize some of the project's fundings and do so in a way that I hope will encourage you to dig in further. Let me share my screen here and we can get underway. Okay, well, again, thank you. The first steps to building a watershed restoration plan is to build an understanding of the current state of the watershed. In order to do that, we looked at the then available data, including the surface water quality information that was available, data on soil and groundwater contamination, illicit discharges, and the historical development and use of the watershed. Review of the available data leads us to start the process of filling in the data gaps and making observations about current conditions. In this project, that included sampling of the aquatic insects, water, and sediment in the watershed. Importantly, discussions and tours with stakeholders. We sent field crews out to make observations of current conditions. And once again, looking at current and even future land use and in the watershed. Before I present results, I'll say in general that the findings were no surprise to us, but it was certainly necessary to confirm some of the previous data and quantify the information that we had. A good way to determine the health of a watershed is to determine the health and diversity of what lives in it. One of the ways we do that is by looking at aquatic insects. Now, Town Branch has long been known as one of the unhealthiest streams in Buncombe County in terms of aquatic insect health and diversity. We sampled 3 sites along Town Branch and expanded our monitoring to Bacoate and Haith Branch. Fairly good conditions were found above McCormick Field and a tributary to Town Branch and in Haith Branch. Marginally fair conditions in Town and Bacoate Branch, and one very poor condition site in Lower Town Branch. Now, the French Broad River Keeper has been monitoring Town Branch for bacteria during the summer months and has found that it routinely exceeds the levels of concern. We performed sampling during both dry and wet weather periods in the 3 streams and pretty much saw the same concerns. Now, the chemistry of the water flowing in the streams itself is something else that we took a look at. The Volunteer Watershed Information Network in 2016 reported that Town Branch had poor water quality. Our project confirmed that for Town Branch and found similar conditions in Bacoate Branch. Pleased somewhat to note better conditions in Haith Branch. Now, the VWIN program ended sampling after 2016, but VWIN has restarted as of March of this year. It now covers all 3 streams and is funded for the next 3 years. We also sampled sediments at the location shown on this map. We didn't assign a rating to the results, but found levels of petroleum products, metals, and other constituents to be typical or higher than other urban North Carolina streams. As the restoration plan is implemented, additional sediment sampling is recommended. One of the major activities was to send field crews out across the watershed making observations. We, in fact, made hundreds of observations of stream reach conditions, utility conditions, the location of stormwater control measures and their condition, and so forth. This map shows locations of some of the observations made by the field crews. The focus of their observations were first to characterize the current conditions, second, to identify specific problem areas, and then importantly, third, finding areas where improvements could be made and identifying the constraints on designing those improvements. Now, the watershed has many stressors and sources of impairment of the water. Overall, the watershed has a lot of impervious surface. Impervious areas increase runoff volumes and velocities. They raise the stream temperatures during hot summer days. They deliver petroleum products, metals, and other pollutants to the stormwater system and to the streams. And impervious area also prevents infiltration, which results in lower water levels during dry weather. Unfortunately, our urban infrastructure also is a stressor. Our stormwater infrastructure concentrates and delivers runoff to localized points in the streams, and that often results in severe erosion of the banks. Much of our streams are now underground in pipes and tunnels, out of sight, out of mind, and unfortunately providing little in the way of valuable habitat and water treatment. Our roads and bridges and other infrastructure also delivers harmful substances to our streams. A source illicit discharges from construction, commercial and industrial operations, sanitary sewer leaks, breaks and spills, and individuals pouring harmful substances on the ground or down the stormwater system also cause severe and long-lasting harm to the aquatic environment, and sometimes represents a human health risk as well. And then trash. Trash is not just an eyesore. It can be directly harmful to our aquatic systems, but in general, it just results in the community withdrawing from and no longer caring about our streams. Invasive plants in the riparian area of the 3 central Asheville watershed streams directly harm the environment and, like trash, interfere with the community's interaction of and enjoyment of the streams. Removal of invasive plants by chemicals may also harm the environment. So quickly, our assessment conclusions are that Town Branch and Bacoate Branch are impaired. We'll note that NCDEQ makes the regulatory determination of water body impairment, but we're using impaired in the sense of our assessment of community values and aspirations for these streams. Again, we're pleased to find that Haith Branch is certainly stressed, but perhaps not impaired. Now, as you see at your bottom of the screen, things are not going to get better on their own. It's going to take a concerted and persistent effort to see improvement occur. And it's got to be improvement not just from current conditions, but from the future growth that's going to occur in the watershed. We examined the preferred growth scenario of the Asheville Comprehensive Plan and predict that unless we change the way we're doing things, the watershed stressors will significantly increase over the next decade. Specifically, we expect impervious area coverage to increase by over 2% by 2030, and the export of common pollutants will increase by between 2 and 8%, depending upon which particular stream and pollutant you're talking about. So that kind of sums up our conclusions. Thank you. Now Renee is going to start our discussion on recommended restoration plans. Renee, it's all yours. Thank you.
Okay, so now that we know more about the state of the Central Asheville watershed, I want to talk about our specific goals for restoring the watershed. And so the overall overarching goal would be to have cleaner, safer streams. And we acknowledge that these urban streams will never be restored to the level of, say, a stream in the heart of Pisgah National Forest. That's not what we're aiming for. But we believe that by implementing this restoration plan over time, we can achieve cleaner, safer streams, streams that we can feel good about kids getting into and exploring. So to that end, our other goals are to reduce pollutants, particularly bacteria and toxins. Keeping them out of this watershed keeps them from getting into the French Broad River. A goal will be better stormwater management, specifically more green infrastructure throughout the watershed. Green infrastructure captures stormwater runoff before it leaves a site, like a parking lot or a building rooftop, keeps it on site and treats it there, keeps it out of our streams. Also increase the capacity of the stormwater system. We know in certain parts of this watershed, it's currently undersized for the amount of flows that it is receiving, and this results in street flooding. And so addressing that would reduce flooding in the watershed. Of course, adding green infrastructure would also serve to do that. Promote the permanent protection of the Haith Branch watershed. And because we can't achieve this goal of cleaner, safer streams with just restoration projects, another goal is to influence public policy to reduce pollution. raise awareness among the community of these illicit discharges that Marshall mentioned earlier that happen so frequently in this watershed. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't realize that the storm drain is piped directly into the nearest stream, and reduce sediment from erosion, because sediment pollution is a big deal in these streams and in the French Broad River. So those are our goals. And developing the plan, RiverLink and the project team really tried to build this plan in the context of this specific watershed. And we found social equity and climate change to be two big aspects of the watershed that we wanted to kind of form this plan through the lens of those two issues. This watershed contains historically marginalized communities. These historic African American communities include the East End Valley Street, the Southside community. Both have been negatively impacted by decades of discrimination and harmful public policies. For example, the urban renewal program that was implemented here, particularly in the 1970s in Asheville, really just demolished the core of these communities, and they're still feeling the impacts from that. And so, you know, certainly, understandably so, the residents of these communities see restoration projects like the one that we're undertaking with skepticism. This image on the left is a snapshot of an area of the Southside community, and it really shows the devastation that occurred as a result of urban renewal. The image in the top, it's hard to see, but Nasty Branch or Town Branch is here flowing through this community, and there are many homes and businesses along the banks of Nasty Branch in 1951. These were primarily owned by African Americans, and in the name of progress, the urban renewal program came in and in an effort to supposedly reduce blight and make communities safer, they demolished all of these homes and businesses. And so, like I said, communities still feeling the impacts of these harmful policies. And so, you know, our charge to the project team and to ourselves at RiverLink was to try and develop a plan that benefits these marginalized communities rather than does further harm. And as far as climate change goes, the restoration plan and the projects that are proposed certainly will help address climate change and help make Asheville more climate resilient. And I think Tim Orman's going to go into a little bit more detail about that later on. So we're getting ready to talk about some of the proposed projects and initiatives. The map on the left shows many of the projects that are being proposed. They're spread throughout the watershed, many different types of projects, but because we have a limited amount of time today, we're only going to be able to cover a few of these. But I also want to acknowledge that the proposals we're presenting today are concepts, and we realize that moving forward, we have a lot of work to do to get community input on these ideas. And ultimately, you know, the next step will be to come up with a design and something that we can implement and get funding for, but the final design will be shaped by input from the community, particularly residents who live near some of the projects that we're proposing. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tim Orman with Blue Earth Engineering to discuss some of the proposed projects. All right, Tim, you should be good to go.
All right, thank you, Renee, and good morning, everybody. Okay, as Renee mentioned, we have 62 different projects and policies proposed for the watershed, so we can only cover a few of them in our time right now, but I'll encourage you to explore the story map that Renee will be describing shortly. The 4 projects that we'd like to describe are Livingston Heights, Mountainside Memorial Park, Haith Branch, Bacoate Branch, and then there are 2 policy initiatives that I'll also describe. Before diving into the projects, I wanted to talk briefly about green stormwater infrastructure, which is a key part of the framework that we use for the watershed restoration approach and for developing project concepts. For those of you unfamiliar with green infrastructure, It is a design approach that uses soils and vegetation to capture, infiltrate, evapotranspirate, and or recycle stormwater runoff. These are a couple of examples: bioretention, pervious pavement, basically thinking about the way a natural watershed functions and trying to mimic that within an urban developed watershed. A good way to remember it is slow it, spread it, sink it. One of the beautiful aspects of green infrastructure is it can be applied at different scales. For example, the watershed scale, in this case, preserving critical open green space. At the neighborhood scale, example being a community wetland, and also at the individual property scale, things such as rain gardens, cisterns, rain barrels. Here are just a few examples. You might be familiar with some of them and some of them you may not. Rain barrels, cisterns, both above ground and underground, rain gardens along streets, bioretention cells, living roofs or green roofs, stormwater wetlands, swales, permeable pavement of various types, disconnected impervious surfaces or downspout disconnection, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail later. This is an infiltration garden, some innovative practices like using mushroom mycelium for stormwater treatment, terrace bioretention, regenerative stormwater conveyance, which Marshall will talk about, and there are many, many others. There are many benefits to green infrastructure, and I'm just going to name a few of them right now. Some of them are probably obvious and some of them may be less so. It improves water quality, reduces runoff, reduces flooding and erosion downstream, reduces the need and cost for conventional infrastructure. And as Renee was speaking to, with climate change, there's a lot of concern about urban heat island effect. Also increased climate resilience, mitigating the intense storms that we're getting. Creates wildlife habitat. And actually there are numerous human health benefits. There are a number of published studies citing more livable communities and even improved mental health when you're close to green infrastructure. And so with that green infrastructure primer, you can keep some of those ideas in mind as we get into some of the projects, and you'll see some of these practices that are proposed throughout the watershed. So the first one is Livingston Heights. And as you might guess, it's along Livingston Street. Just zooming in right here. There are a number of project components proposed, but I'm only going to talk about a few of them. Replacing a concrete ditch with an ephemeral stream, kind of restoring that, a constructed wetland, and then a DIS pilot project, which I'll describe what that acronym is, and a green jobs program. And zooming in here, if you look closely at this parking lot, you'll see it's wet, and it's wet most of the year. The reason for that is there's a significant drainage area that just flows across this parking lot. Our team has spoken with residents, and they said it's not only a nuisance, but even in the winter it freezes and creates a hazard. So one of the proposed projects is to address this. So here's the concrete ditch, that's the wetland. And now I'm going to briefly go to a high-tech multimedia presentation here, so you can get a little bit of a view of it. It's actually just a video clip. So this is an existing wetland area because it's so wet, but this will be expanded as part of the project concept. And you can see it's continually seeping into this parking area. You have this iron oxidizing bacteria, and it basically goes across this parking lot, freezes. I'm gonna jump ahead and show you the swale. This is a concrete swale. So basically this is conveying about 16 acres of mostly or highly impervious watershed area, and all of the pollutants basically coming right down into the Livingston Heights community. And so this component involves removing the concrete, creating an ephemeral stream and riparian habitat that will allow infiltration and hydration of the watershed. Okay, I'm going to jump to the next slide here. The other component is DIS. We all love acronyms, and DIS stands for Disconnected Impervious Surface. It's an approved practice in the state of North Carolina stormwater manual, and it has the benefit of being very inexpensive. Basically, you're disconnecting your downspouts, as you can see in that schematic, and allowing it to flow over a vegetated surface. Both roofs and paved areas can be disconnected with slightly different designs. The Livingston Heights community has over 50,000 square feet of roof and parking area, and this could be harvested for landscape irrigation, orchards, community gardens, etc. And these are just a few examples of disconnected impervious surface. This is into a rock-lined swale. It could be connected to rain barrels, to larger cisterns. And this is a rain spiral, which is actually in my front yard. There are all kinds of opportunities for innovation, creativity. In the mountains, we need to be concerned about steeper slopes as well. And the last component for Livingston Heights I wanted to mention is the Green Jobs Initiative. As Renee spoke about all of the historic injustices in this neighborhood, thinking about people as part of the watershed ecosystem. And so we've developed a proposal for this Green Jobs training program, working with potential local partners such as Green Opportunities, Southside Rising, Bountiful Cities, AB Tech, Greenworks. And there are a number of training programs. Some have a proven track record nationally. Center for Watershed Protection. There's Tree Equity Program. Bountiful Cities locally has its Grass to Greens apprenticeship program, and Youth Build USA. And not just training, we're interested in actual job placement. And so working with local contractors to provide living wage job opportunities that are permanent, and identifying potential funding sources as part of this as well. City of Asheville is potential, as well as different grants and private property owners. The next one I'd like to jump to is Mountainside Memorial Park over here. And zooming in, you can see that this area extends all the way up to a forested area along Bowcatcher Mountain and flows down through Mountainside Memorial Stadium, the soccer fields, as well as McCormick Field. And the reason it's important is that it flows into Town Branch, and if solutions can be applied upstream, they'll have benefits further downstream for both water quality and water quantity. In McCormick Field, the outfield has had flooding, and there are a number of infrastructure problems in this watershed. It's actually been evaluated as part of the City of Asheville Capital Improvement Program, and it is a recommended project. So there's a lot of evaluation and study already here, and applying solutions here will be a win-win. It will benefit the downstream residents as well as the upper watershed. I'd like to just mention briefly two of the components, a detention storage area upstream. And you can see a picture looking upstream. There's kind of a low depressed area that could be used for storing significant volume of stormwater runoff. And then daylighting a stream. And for those not familiar with that term, it's basically an approach to bring buried waterways back to life by physically uncovering and restoring them. And that will also help to reduce downstream flooding, create ecological benefit and habitat. That shows the general area. And then I just want to talk briefly about two policies that are proposed. The first one, if you're not familiar with polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, it's good to be familiar with them. Research conducted over the past 2 decades have shown that PAHs are significant toxic contaminants within the urban atmosphere and urban waterways. A significant source of them are parking lot sealants, and they make asphalt look shiny black. And I saw one article that said, is your driveway killing you? So just add that to the mix for 2020. We have one more thing to worry about. The good news is there's already been a lot of movement to ban these because of their toxic effects. And this is a map from Coal Tar Free USA showing communities that have already instituted bans and or restricted sales. The the states that are outlined in color, they have some type of ban or restriction. And then various communities in North Carolina, Boone, Matthews, Charlotte, and Mecklenburg County all have either imposed bans or restrictions. And we're hoping Asheville would be part of that as well. And the last policy I wanted to speak about is a Riparian Area Management Plan, or RAMP, another acronym. And in your travels around Asheville doing urban hikes, you've probably seen conditions like this: various invasive plants and vines overtaking area, kudzu, the usual suspects. And you'll also see along streams just a lack of riparian buffer and lack of riparian health. And so this proposal, this policy proposal, is to work with the many city departments and public utilities that routinely interact with riparian buffers in their day-to-day operations, and having this working group come up with a plan to help the health of riparian buffers and water quality of streams, wetlands, and lakes that are related. And part of the proposal includes 2 pilot study areas. One is along Nasty Branch and the other along Haith Branch, because there are significant riparian buffers here. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Marshall.
All right, folks, I am pleased to be able to talk about Haith Branch at this point. I've worked on a number of urban watershed plans and so forth, but Haith Branch has been one of the areas that has been a real pleasure to look at and determine the possibilities for what we can do there. Haith Branch is shown here as the watershed, mainly comprised of property owned by the county, the AB Tech campus. On the north side, it's bounded by Oakland Road and the Walton Street Park. One of the important features about Haith Branch is the large amount of forested areas that you can see through which the branch and its small tributaries run. That forested area has given Haith Branch the water quality in it, a resilience that doesn't exist in other streams in the watershed. Now, that forested area is also really a bit of a gem, sitting within a highly urbanized areas. The stream itself is stressed but not impaired by our determination. The area provides habitat for aquatic and terrestrial wildlife. It treats the polluted runoff that comes from above, and it also serves as an outdoor recreational area, classroom, and laboratory. Now, like other parts of the Central Asheville watershed, the primary stressor to Haith Branch is the highly impervious area up the hills above the streams. And in some cases, I would add that it's missed opportunities for better stormwater management in those areas. That's resulted in some pretty severe slope and stream erosion leading down to and through Haith Branch. And that erosion itself can damage, for example, the sanitary sewer system in the watershed, which would, of course, impose additional problems. Now, there's 10 projects in the restoration plan that address Haith Branch and its restoration and protection. Areas I'm pointing out here are areas of particular high priority projects. They start up on the high slope, up on the top of the slope in the parking lots of AB Tech. They include a proposed detention area down below Fernahurst Road. You'll see later in just a moment a heavily eroded outfall that leads down into the remnants of a seep or bog down below, and then to Haith Branch itself. And I'll also discuss improvements up in Walton Street Park on the north edge of the watershed. So a priority item here that can be done inexpensively is retrofitting the parking lots up at AB Tech to detain and treat road, parking lot, and building runoff. This is an important opportunity. Here, for example, you see a raised parking lot island that can easily be turned into a recessed island that would detain water, allow some of that water to infiltrate and provide water quality treatment to what does get discharged downstream before it is released. Restoring some of the infiltration that used to occur naturally in this area would certainly have downstream benefits as well. Now, this is not on the AB Tech campus, but here's a small detention and a biodetention basin. We would have proposed something like this below Fernahurst. Additional detention and water quality treatment that would occur from this will probably be necessary because we cannot get all the benefits we need out of retrofitting parking areas, most likely. Now, the problems that the impervious area up above has created include this. In the upper left-hand corner, you see a picture of a fairly large diameter stormwater pipe that's empty into what has turned into an over 13 feet deep plunge pool. In the upper right, you'll see Renee standing at the bottom of that plunge pool, looking up at the pipe, just to give you some idea of the scale that you can't get from the other picture. In the lower left is actually a photograph taken well downstream of that plunge pool, where the water ripping out of that pipe coming off the campus has created a large gully, which carries tons of sediment in the Haith branch and the French Broad River. And then in the lower right picture, we see another example of failed stormwater infrastructure that's causing erosion in the area. Now, we want to address the issues of erosion in the watershed by using what's called regenerative stormwater conveyance and natural design methods. We recommend that this as a repair method, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples here. This is an example provided by one of our team members on projects that she was previously engaged in. You see a fellow on the left standing below a large eroded area, or in a large eroded area, that is not unlike in ways what we see in Haith Branch watershed. And then on the right, we see at least a representative example of what that stream could be turned into. Another example is shown here, a couple of different approaches. You'll see here where one approach is to provide a lot of gravel, rock, and stages to help stabilize an area. And that can be extended into a set of pools, steps, and so forth through there, which revegetate and converts a lot of the stormwater to groundwater. Now, this is important because, as I noted, there's a larger remnant seep or bog area down below that, which has been cut through by the erosive forces of that channel. And in restoring this eroded channel and fixing that plunge pool and so forth, and using natural design methods, we can restore that environmentally sensitive and important habitat. Now, quickly, I want to talk about the Walton Street Park. We've got a number of projects recommended up there, and the recommended projects will both improve the park itself and will certainly benefit the watershed below it. Now, I'm going to jump very quickly over to Bacoate Branch and cover that so that we can get on with Renee wrapping up and our getting on to questions and answers. We proposed 16 physical projects in Bacoate Branch. Several of the projects would be associated with construction of the proposed greenway through this area. There are certainly some high priority gully repairs and restoration that needs to go on there. Additionally, there's a a priority disconnecting impervious surfaces pilot project, similar to what Tim was talking about over in Livingston Heights that we have proposed there. An overview of the plan is here. We recommended 49 physical projects at a cost of about $3.2 million to be constructed over the next 7 to 10 years. If these projects are constructed, they can halt much of the degradation that I talked about occurring due to Asheville's growth and set us on a path towards restoration. It's important to note that it's essential that these projects serve as cost-effective improvements and community-welcomed improvements, because to actually make restoration progress in restoring water quality and reducing the pollutants delivered to the French Broad River, we have to see these methods applied widely, adopted by other landowners and government agencies. Now, very briefly, Tim had mentioned that the plan works at all scales, and additional policy recommendations that we've made are shown here. These will help us move from, again, simply mitigating the impacts to restoring water quality. We're not just talking about government policy here, but broadly ways that RiverLink and other nonprofits and individuals can get better engaged in the watershed restoration and protection. It's going to take all of us if we're going to decide to make progress here. Thank you. I look forward to your questions and answers in the session, and I'll turn it back over to Renee.
Thanks, Marshall. I just wanted to share the story map with you. Here it is. So as I mentioned earlier, this was developed in a partnership with Wildlands Engineering. This interactive watershed restoration plan will live on RiverLink's website and be readily available to the public and all of our partners in the community. And you can, we've noted that we are still calling it a draft at this point, just, pending input from all of you today. But this map, the interactive map, is going to be readily updatable. So as the project moves forward, we'll be able to easily update the progress that we've made and adjust recommendations and all of those things. But I just wanted to point out this aerial image of this, just a small section of the watershed. Here's the river and the railroad. But notice this, and this is AB Tech campus. And here's the Haith branch watershed. You can see it's heavily forested. But to explore this web map, you can click on the tabs at the top. Each one represents a different topic within the watershed restoration plan. On the left, you have text and links to outside resources. On the right, you have an interactive map that you can scroll into to see greater detail in the watershed. We have a tab on demographics and community, so you can explore this to learn anything you ever wanted to know about this intra-watershed and then some. We have a section on community disruption, talks about urban renewal, and then the water quality information that Marshall gave an overview on today. All of those details are included here in the water quality section, including links to the NCDWR lab results. Again, you can zoom in on the map. You can click on waypoints and icons and learn more about that particular location. All of the field assessment notes that we took are in here, broken down by the type of observation that we made, erosion, buffer, utilities, even trash. Again, you can zoom in and you could click on a particular icon and see what our observation was. Here we have stream and riparian area restoration opportunity along Town Branch. You can even filter our observations based on priority. So if you want to only see the really high priority areas, you can do that. So it's a little cool function that Wildlands added to the map. Prioritize projects. They're all included here in this tab. You can see where they're located in the watershed. You can even scroll on the left side to see more about the cost and the different types of projects themselves. And then finally, we have 3 additional tabs that aren't visible unless you click on this drop-down box, but we have a tab dedicated to the different stakeholders that were engaged in this process and that are doing great work in this watershed already. We have links to their websites. Here's an image of the Trash Trout Junior that Asheville Greenworks has installed on Town Branch. So a lot of good information here. I encourage you to explore this interactive story map. I know a lot of you already have the link to the map. It will be on RiverLink's website within the next couple weeks. If you are interested in having that link sooner, you could let me know in the chat box, or you could also shoot me an email at renee@riverlink.org.
Okay, so what are the next steps for this project? We'll continue conducting outreach and gathering community input on proposed projects. We'll pursue funding to implement the plan. Continue building partnerships and exploring job training opportunities. We'll also promote county and citywide ban on PAHs. We'll begin an illicit discharge awareness campaign and collaborate with AB Tech and Buncombe County to restore and protect the Haith Branch watershed. And with that, I would like to thank you for joining us today and give a big thanks to the project team led by Blue Earth Engineering. There were several amazing firms that we worked with on the project. They're listed here. Also, NCDEQ, Division of Water Resources, provided a significant amount of staff time and also offered their water quality lab to analyze our water samples. I'd like to thank Brett Laverty with DWR in particular. He spent a lot of time on this project and responding to illicit discharges that were discovered in the watershed. Also, a big thanks to Sarah Clement, our AmeriCorps Project Conserve member. She spent countless hours exploring the watershed, doing field assessments, and Sarah also led our Name That Creek campaign for Haith Branch. And with that, we'll end the presentation, and now we want to hear from you.
Marshall and Tim, can you, there you go, start your video and unmute yourselves. I'm going to need your help with the questions. All right, from Joe Ransmeyer. Marshall, you mentioned that VWIN has resumed sampling in the watershed and is funded for the next 3 years. Who are they?
Okay, Renee, thank you for passing the mic. VWIN is the Volunteer Water Information Network, a network that started a good long time ago, associated with UNC Asheville at a time, and now ran and championed by the Environmental Quality Institute out of Black Mountain. They do analysis for samples across the western North Carolina counties. And as I mentioned, they agreed to expand the sampling in the watershed to all 3 streams. And Renee and RiverLink was able to get it funded at least for 3 years. I'll point out that the implementation plan for the restoration plan is going to last 7, 10, perhaps years, perhaps longer. So we'll need to find funding for continuing work in that area.
Great. From Emily Breckheimer, how do you access the trails on Overlook Park? I know I've accessed the trails via Memorial, is it called Memorial Park? Mountain Memorial Side Park. There's a trailhead kind of at the far left of the park where you can access Overlook Park.
And actually actually that access that Renee was just mentioning is in the area of what we're proposing as daylighting the stream and some detention. And the design will certainly take that into consideration. The overall design concept there is not going to be a typical detention pond, which people would not be getting into. It's really a design to use a big recreational field for detention during heavy storm periods.
And that really points to the next question of, daylighting a stream would be unearthing it from underground piping, correct?
That's right. Get it out of the pipes, bring it back up to the ground, to the surface, where it feels the rain, sees the sunshine, and treats the water that's coming through it.
From Ann Keller, how many of the proposed projects included in the city CIP or are the type that could be built via the city CIP? So that's the capital improvement projects.
There's a number of them, particularly some up at Mountainside Memorial Park, McCormick Field area. In fact, Tim and I both worked on the preliminary design concepts for those. And during this project, I think we found some ways that we can actually improve those designs for both quantity and quality treatment, and also perhaps save the city some money over for the construction costs over what was originally proposed. There's others that are in the plan that are also in the CIP, such as some stormwater improvements in the vicinity of Cox Avenue and Southside. I'm kind of drawing a blank. There's a couple of other projects that are already in the city stormwater CIP, and there's a number of projects that the city would be getting to eventually as maintenance and repair issues as well.
Okay, another question. Imagine you have ballparked total cost. Does it make sense to zero in a few smaller portions of the project area, such as Haith Branch? Yeah, go ahead, Marshall.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. And in fact, if you, there's a database, or what's actually just a spreadsheet as you will download it, of the proposed projects, and you can see which projects are proposed in each of the sub-watersheds, determine which of those are high, medium, and low priority, and look at the cost. And one of the things I'll point out that Renee mentioned is that all of the projects are at a conceptual level, some of them more advanced in concept than others, but all of the project costs have been staged in such a way so that the first step will be to work with the communities to refine the project concepts and so forth, and to determine a good basis for the design of the projects. And then the next phase of the project goes into the final designs and then construction.
Right, I was going to just pull up maybe a project summary that you could find in the restoration plan. Share that with everyone. Can you see that, Marshall?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so this is an example of one of the project summaries. You can find this in the 9-element watershed plan, but this is for Bacoate Branch, a riparian restoration, and it zeroes in on that area, and it gives estimated next phase costs, and then the total estimated cost, and kind of, how it's scored on our priority scale, as long as like a schedule for start date and project lead and all of that. So, so the information is in the plan. Oh, you didn't see it? Could you see the project plan, or did you just see my email?
No, I was able to see the plan.
Okay, great. Okay, next question. Will City Council be briefed on this plan? It's great that city staff has joined the presentation, but getting this to City Council directly will be a real benefit. Yeah, we hope to do that at some point, absolutely. Several people saying great presentation, but they have to leave. Another question or comment, thinking interdisciplinarily as you have helped save the city money and people to understand that approaching infrastructure, transit, parks, etc. together make for much better projects. It's a good observation. Are there any additional funding sources since March, in parentheses, job creation, that could help jumpstart the noted improvements plan, for instance, for Bacoate branch? I imagine, Robert, Todd, are you speaking of maybe COVID-related funding sources that have come about since March for job creation?
Or, yeah, that's exactly it. Or potentially, if we are trying to reestablish some workforce, if there's any funding that might be available for that.
Yeah, that's a great question and certainly something that we will be exploring. I don't know of specific funding sources that are new, but I think that also points to the idea that getting this plan before City Council is very important to see how they can contribute to the job creation component of the plan. Marshall and Tim, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I don't have any any better direct response to that. I certainly think that, there's, in this time of what we may say a crisis, there's also opportunity as usual. So we need to explore that. I will note that we observed enough immediate problems that need to be addressed in the watershed, so that the sooner we can actually get started on the next phases on some of these projects, certainly the better.
All right, great questions, everyone. It looks like those are all the questions we had in the chat box. I will open it up for open discussion. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and state your name and then your comment and question, that'd be great. If not, that's okay too.
Renee, I'd like to have a slight discussion. So I'm Shelley Shanker, and I'm a property owner, and my property actually houses a lot of the Bacoate branch, a beautiful piece of the Bacoate branch that fits the description of trying to create a community connection, because it is such a beautiful piece of the branch. And I'm wondering if there has been precedents where when you have private property owners who are willing to work on projects such as these, because they're needed, because that branch is, when it gets inundated with water from the city, it continues to erode the land, and pretty soon we won't have a driveway that goes into it. So we would like to, we have to shore up some of that land. And I'm wondering if there's a precedence where when we work on projects that benefit the city and or the county, that those places who are taxing us so heavily on that land have some kind of tax help or benefit if they don't have, like we're doing a project for the city, do they have programs where, because we're doing a project that benefits the whole area and the community, they kind of give us a tax break or something like that?
Good question, Shelley. I am not aware of any tax breaks offered by the city based on, I guess this would be sort of like stormwater infrastructure work that you'd be doing, or stream bank erosion work. The city tends to, not contribute taxpayer dollars to work on private lands, just because, from what I've been told, it can open up a whole can of worms when you start, putting city resources into a private property. It's kind of like, well, where does that end? So they tend to just work within the city's right of way. As far as funding goes, I mean, there are foundation grants and other grant funding opportunities that private landowners have access to through nonprofits like RiverLink and other groups that work to do this kind of restoration work. So that's a possibility. Marshall can speak to this also probably in greater detail. you know, I wonder, I know where your property sits there along the Bacoate branch, and I wonder if some of the projects that we're proposing upslope from you to address the erosional gully and the stormwater runoff that's coming from Asheville Middle School's campus. I wonder, I mean, I imagine that that property will benefit from those improvements. But Marshall, can you speak to that?
Well, I guess to start with, you can understand that the city has always been hesitant to, as Renee said, expend taxpayer funds on private property. That said, they sometimes just have to do that. They get a easement or right of access through the private property, and they'll spend money there on a selective basis when it's solving some problem in the city streets and so forth. A number of North Carolina communities have residents landowner assistance programs for either addressing drainage or water quality improvements on their private property that go beyond the tax benefit. They go into where they will actually share materials and construction costs and so forth. And I know that the city has looked at that in the past. It was a recommendation out of a stormwater advisory group a number of years ago that the city consider that, and it was considered. The current restoration plan asks them to consider that again, that in the Central Asheville Watershed, we believe there's restoration is going to be dependent upon public-private partnerships. I know that's not an informative answer for you, but that's where we stand in Asheville.
You know, what that reminds me of, Marshall, is also the fact that getting the presentation in front of City Council would really allow that conversation to be had more openly and strongly. I think the cost share they have, I remember, I think in Charlotte, seems to help them get projects done a lot better and faster than we might be able to do it here. So, I mean, I feel like there needs to be some more comprehensive discussion in the city about the fact that these stormwater issues and water quality and flooding issues are all coming together, and how can we fund them all and get them all done to make life better here and protect us from future issues that we're all going to get from climate change and so forth. So, I mean, I think there's it would be a robust opportunity for a conversation that we really should press for.
Yes, and these other municipalities that you're referring to have, I mean, like the city of Asheville, they have something called a stormwater utility fee, but their fees are higher than Asheville's. Our fee is very low, but they use those fees to fund those assistance programs, as well as, you know, keep up with general maintenance on the stormwater infrastructure. So I think to adequately implement some kind of program like that at the city level, you know, the community would have to be willing and open to the city increasing their stormwater utility fees.
Given potential benefits, sometimes it's a lot easier to have that conversation and get that support, which is another reason to talk about it publicly.
Yeah. I see a question, another question I missed, or it just came up. How will the CWP continue to be updated over time? And can you speak to the monitoring program that was developed? So the CWP being the restoration plan, we will be updating it as we implement projects, and that will be done through the interactive web app. Marshall or Tim, do you want to speak about the monitoring program that was developed? As part of a watershed restoration plan, you want to have a monitoring program in place so that you can track improvements to water quality as you implement projects and initiatives over time. And if you're not seeing improvements over time, then that's when you step back and you reevaluate your plan and make adjustments accordingly. Anything else, Marshall, you want to add?
Yeah, without getting into the details of the monitoring plan, I will say that it's broad. This particular plan is meant to allow us to gauge the effectiveness of the projects that we're putting in and how the the trend in the overall watershed and so forth. So it's laid out, it's in there in different components and cost and so forth. So the monitoring plan is an important component. There's a whole tab in the interactive story map on that plan. I'd encourage you to take a look at it.
Great. Anyone else have a comment or a question?
Looks like there's a hand up for Lucy Crown's account. It's not Lucy. Somebody's in on Lucy's account. There's a hand.
Okay. If you want to speak, you should be able to, okay, I see, raise your hand. Can you unmute? I'm not sure that I can unmute you. Is that you, Roy?
Okay, am I doing it right?
There you are, we can hear you, hi. For some reason, it says you're Lucy Crown on the screen, but we know that's not true.
I think I came on that's not true. Lucy has blonde hair.
Yes.
Mine's is pepper, salt and pepper. Okay, one of the things I just want to say is thank you for this report. It is one of the times in my 30-some years here in Asheville that I was actually able to sit down, hear a report, understand the report, was not talked down to or talked away from. And I really appreciate what you all have done with this project. I cross Nasty Branch or Bacoate Branch probably every day in my walking experience or in my riding experience as I ride the public transportation and everything. I've walked the Haith branch part of it the other day and heard some rustling that, come to think of it, I thought it was a bear somewhere hibernating down there. And so I decided I better leave. And so I left that bear to his own territory. But thank you for the report. Thank you for all that y'all are doing. My only question right now is trying to figure out how to tie, especially for my neighborhood, Southside neighborhood, how to tie all this together. But what other projects may be going on in the neighborhoods and in my neighborhood. So thanks again. Just want to make that comment.
Thank you, Roy. The jackhammering has started up again outside my office windows, so I'm not sure if y'all are going to be able to hear me well. But I think as far as tying into other community initiatives in the Southside community, you know, doing that outreach, continuing to talk with potential community partners like Asheville Greenworks and their initiative to plant more trees in the neighborhood, working with Bountiful Cities and their efforts in the community gardens. I think those are going to be the ways that we'll be able to tie this watershed restoration plan into all the other efforts in the community, and certainly open to ideas from community members as to how we can do that more effectively. But I think you're right, Roy, it'll be critical for all of us to kind of combine our efforts and have a bigger impact.
Because one of the things I've talked to someone lately, this is nonprofits in Asheville go two ways, environmental or people. And those two shall never meet. And then I'm like, you're right. So that's one of my concerns, that the environmental efforts that are happening in this community or any community, that they're tied to people. And because if something affects the environment, then it affects the people. And if it affects the people, then they have some on the environment. And I think this project shows that things that we've done as individuals or cities has a great effect on the environment. So thanks again.
Thanks, Roy. Wise words. Anyone else have a comment or a question?
Hey, Renee, as we close out, I want to thank you. We have very impressive staff at RiverLink, and you certainly have demonstrated that for you personally today, and the way you've conducted this project management, which is what your role has been throughout this. You've been a leader and you've been a project manager, and we're really appreciative that you're part of our team and your hard work to make this happen. So also thanks to your fine committee that you've created, because they were important to this as well. So thank you. Without further ado, it looks like we're at the end. So thank you all for being here. Please continue to support RiverLink. We can't do our work, your passion for the river, for your neighborhoods, and for connecting those neighborhoods to the river and to your streams can't be done without you. So please continue to support us. It's been a really important year this year as we get through this 2020 and this pandemic together. But the environment's still just as important. And I agree with Roy. I'll end with this. John Francis, who is known as the Planet Walker, a great environmentalist, makes a very strong point in his book, Planet Walker. You can look it up about people are part of the environment too. So we'll leave with that. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Wonderful job, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Stay well.
Thank you. Thank you.